according to the reports that are emerging within the Israeli media, they have been handed over to members of the Red Cross, and they are now going to be taken through the Rafah border crossing, and from there on they would be airlifted and then taken into Israel. These are images, however, from the West Bank that we are getting from. And also on the show, we're being joined by Halit Barrel, who's a former director at Israel's National Security Council. And our guest is, of course, joining from Tel Aviv. Now, Ms. Barrel, this is a crucial moment in this entire conflict. There is a breakthrough for the first time in 49 days, Ms. Barrel, where now we expect the Israeli hostages who have been in the custody of Hamas, they've been handed over to members of the Red Cross. They have been set free. This is according to reports within the Israeli media. Give us a sense of what is expected to happen from here. How do you think the Israeli government under Netanyahu is, of course, looking at this?
Well, first of all, the only corroborated reports that we have at this point is that they have been handed to the Red Cross, headed towards the Rafah crossing. Not sure if they have been received yet by the Egyptian forces that are supposed to meet them there. And then the next tranche after that is they would be met by Israeli forces. And, of course, taken immediately to hospitals because of the very difficult conditions that they were held in. So this is exactly in the midst of it. Publicly, we haven't heard the names yet of the 13 people who were released today, the children and the mothers. So we're all waiting very, very anxiously to see they are okay and that they are handed over. This is, of course, a tremendous test for the whole situation, because this is the first phase of a 4-day plan. And then if it will continue after that, it remains to be seen, according to any understandings that Egypt and Qatar might force upon Hamas. And so obviously this is a tremendous test case that we're looking at right now.
I think that's a crucial point that you made, and you also highlighted that what we know will happen for certain is what happens for the next 4 days. But Ms. Barrel, give us a sense of what is happening on the other end of the bargain. 39 Palestinian prisoners are also expected to be set free. Women, and many of them are also said to be children. Have you heard anything on the front of the Palestinian prisoners who had to be set free?
Yes, the Palestinian prisoners have been taken to the points where they are to be released. I don't think there's any concern that they will not be released. It's just a matter of a track record. Israel has always delivered on this. We are talking about people who have committed a range of offenses. At the top of that range are attempted murders, more than one of them, with very, very difficult and complicated situations that emerge from that. For example, a young woman who was stabbed by a Palestinian woman in the neighborhood where she lives. That Palestinian woman is going back to her home, which is literally meters away from where this family that was attacked her. So we're going to. It's important to understand that there's a big difference between the hostages that we are getting back, that are children and women who are abducted from their homes. Hopefully, some of the babies as well will come back today, and terrorists and people who have committed all these crimes or attempted crimes. And mind you, they're going to be going to different places: West Bank, not necessarily the Gaza Strip, and so on. It remains to be seen exactly how this all carries out. So far, it's looking okay, but there's obviously never a guarantee until everything is done.
Absolutely, indeed, because this is a very tenuous situation. It has come about after weeks of negotiations. Now, Ms. Barrel, you have been a former director at Israel's National Security Council. The question that I want to ask you is this. There is a lot of criticism about this deal, not from anyone outside, but from within the Netanyahu government. For instance, Itamar Ben-Gvir has described this deal of exchanging hostages for Palestinian prisoners as completely amoral, and he's dubbed it as a disaster. Does Netanyahu have the backing of his own people, of his own cabinet members, in going forth and proceeding with this deal?
Absolutely. Itamar Ben-Gvir is displaying exactly what he is, which is the extreme right wing, even of this right wing government. So the only faction that voted against this deal in the cabinet is Itamar Ben-Gvir and his people, who are very few out of those 64. So even Smotrich, who is certainly not a dove in any way, shape, or form, has signed off on this deal. So I think it is very safe to say that the vast majority, both in the cabinet and of the Israeli public, agrees with this statement that we must bring the hostages back. If we release this number, that number, it is not insignificant. I just explained how complicated it can be and how costly it is for Israel. But Israel has been known to go to great lengths to bring back its people. And there is no way we can let our children continue to stay in this situation.
I think that, of course, is the overriding sentiment in Israel and indeed around the world, that this is a crisis that needs to be resolved. But a lot of questions have been asked about the Netanyahu government's approach in securing the release of the hostages. There are reports within the Israeli media, like for instance in Haaretz, which say that Netanyahu originally had rejected this deal, but then later buckled under pressure and agreed to this very deal. And if he had agreed to this deal before, then the Israeli hostages could have been freed at least a week or a fortnight before. What do you make of that assessment?
So, of course, these are reports, and we're not privy to the actual details of what the deal was that was on the table or not. Unfortunately, I think that the deal was not really there from Hamas. That's, what I get a sense of from what I understand from within the establishment. So the issue was not so much the stand from the Israeli side as much as the actual commitment from Hamas. And even with this deal that we finally got to sign and hopefully is carried out in these very moments, it was a very difficult effort from Qatar and from Egypt and, of course, the United States and President Biden, and Yahya Sinwar's known tendency to change his mind every other day. But again, if this is true, that Netanyahu did not want to put this deal forth, then, of course, he would have gone completely against public sentiment, which he is not known to do. And so, it would have been obviously a mistaken decision, and obviously would have been turned around, which, if that happened, this is how we've seen it play out. So there's no way that the public sentiment would stand behind letting them stay there. The Israeli establishment has declared that this is, at this time, the best deal that we can achieve, and that is the premise that we are operating on.
Absolutely, indeed, and no one at this moment can, of course, go against the public sentiment that is prevalent in Israel and indeed around the world, that hostages have to be brought back. But there are also reports which say that at a point of time, Netanyahu did not want to even meet with the family members of those who had been taken hostage, because they wanted and they were pressing Netanyahu to immediately strike some kind of a deal and get the hostages back. At this point of time, what Israel has agreed upon is to get back 50 of its hostages. It's still a very tenuous situation. One hopes that it goes through, but still things can go wrong. But I want to ask you, does Netanyahu have a plan of action as to what happens after this 4-day humanitarian pause ends and the 50 Israeli hostages are released?
So again, this is a very speculative situation, of course, because we have to see that the 4 days actually go through, that the ceasefire actually stands, because all of those things have been broken in the past. So we can't just assume that because it was signed and committed to by a terrorist organization, it will actually be carried out. So we have to see if that all actually carries out. And I believe it will, because I believe Hamas has a very strong incentive in keeping the ceasefire, because they are in very dire straits. Then if that goes through, and there's a second phase to this after the 50, then we'll have to see what the terms are and how it plays out. And I want to remind you, this government is not actually led only by Benjamin Netanyahu. Yes, he is the prime minister, but there is a reason why Benny Gantz, who joined the government to make it a unity government, and there's a very significant weight that he carries with him in mitigating this, with former Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot and the Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, and we see them together in the press conferences, because this now has become a much more spread out kind of decision-making process. What will happen next, again, remains to be seen according to the specific terms. But again, as I said before, the public sentiment is very strong in favor of releasing as many hostages as we can. If it takes a few more days of ceasefire, so be it. I think it's also the correct decision. Yes, it's costly for the IDF, but the IDF can certainly handle it. And so we'll have to wait and see what is actually available if this carries out properly.
I think you're making a very important point there. You are suggesting that the Netanyahu government at this point of time, even because it's all speculative, we do not know what could happen and what could go wrong. Once this agreed-to period of 4 days ends, the Netanyahu government should push for, try get the Israeli hostages released in exchange for the humanitarian pause and in exchange for more release of Palestinian prisoners. Is that what you're advocating for, Ms. Bannon?
Absolutely, that is my position. If it is possible, if we can go on and release more hostages, that absolutely should be our first priority. This does not mean that our war against Hamas is over, but this means that there are things that are more time sensitive and come earlier in the set of priorities. So that is certainly where I stand.
Right.
And I think it's quite reflective of where most of the cabinet stand, depending on the execution of the first phase, which we're experiencing right now. And